Thank you for having me back. It's a little nerve-wracking to get up here and speak in front of two distinguished professors of economics, Professor Roberts and Professor Moav. And I barely finished my degree in political science, and that's a BA, not an MA or a PhD. And so I'm going to tackle some stories. I think maybe I'll do better telling a couple stories. So today's Sunday. Last Wednesday, I got invited to speak as the morning speaker for the get-together of the senior management of the housing ministry, Misrad HaShikun, Misrad HaBinui VaShikun. They corrected me there. And I asked them a really simple question, and I'll start by asking you. Why do people in Israel buy apartments for investment? This is like a big topic. If you go to the finance ministry, they want to know, like, so Kachlon tried to tax the third investment apartment. It failed. But like they're obsessed with why people buy investment apartments. It's like a topic that's present. So I asked the whole crowd why people buy investment apartments, and I'll ask you, what's your name? Nuran. Why do people buy apartments for investment in Israel? To have a passive income, you think. You could buy an ETF, right? You can buy an ETF in the stock. That's a passive investment. Why do you buy an apartment? You think it's more solid, okay? You could buy a bond. I know they don't yield very much right now, but anyone else want to hazard a guess? Their parents want them to. You listen to everything your parents tell you? No. Why on this? Why do you listen to your parents on this topic? Oh, okay. So you think it's a bad idea? Anybody else want? Go ahead. Yeah, why do you have an assumption that prices will continue rising? Okay, that's a very fundamental argument, right, which says that there's a certain amount of land and you think there are more and more people and it will go up. Here's an amazing thing. We actually still have more land, right, because we're building more, but somehow the prices still go up even though we haven't used all the land. So why is that? Why is there not enough supply? As I told the people in the audience there, everybody who buys an apartment as an investment is basically betting on their incompetence and impotence. Think about it. Markets are made up of supply and demand. The supply for housing in this country comes obviously from kablanim or contractors, but really it comes from how fast can you put out a permit to build a house. And it turns out that you can actually be in my line of business, invest in a startup, guy comes in with an idea, shows a PowerPoint, he gets 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 rounds of investment, goes public before you can get a building permit almost, right? I know that's an exaggeration, but the point is the same, which is the startup economy operates at a pace that's super productive because it's unshackled. But it's more than unshackled, which is what I'll come to in a second, whereas buying an apartment for investment is basically a bet that the government that regulates it can't produce enough supply to drive the price down. We can build 80-story towers, but we don't. And on and on and on. So every time you buy an apartment for investment, you are making an explicit, in my case, or an implicit bet, in most people's cases, that the government bureaucrats and the regional councils and the municipal councils in Jerusalem, for example, are incompetent. Not present company excluded, of course. She's super competent, Fleur. But that's the implicit bet that we make. Now, why do we make this bet? This is not the only area we make this bet in. We make this bet because, one, they actually don't know what they're optimizing for. One of the first questions you ask any startup company is, okay, what is the tight point that you're optimizing for? Right? And the government is optimizing for no good reason for about 100 things, which are most often in conflict one with the other, which is why when you go to the Jerusalem Building Council, until you get the 3 different people in the room who represent 3 different interests, they actually can't make a decision because each one is optimizing for something different. And the giant difference between these two experiences that I have, one in my day job and one in my volunteer job of trying to educate government ministries is exactly this, which is one is totally unoptimized. How many people here work in the government, by the way, at this point? Listen carefully. So it's really important before you set out to do what you're doing to think like a startup. What am I optimizing for? What point am I trying to break through by focusing all my attention on it? If the object, for example, of the housing ministry is to produce affordable housing versus producing more housing, you will get to a different result because you're optimizing for something entirely different. Now, in many parts of the economy, many parts of the economy, if we go back from 20 years ago until today, we've had a quiet revolution which is underappreciated. And I'll make the point in a simple way. When was the last time you called your bank to ask for your bank balance? You called your bank? Why? You had to negotiate. Yeah, okay, that's something different. But why would anybody call their bank for the bank balance? What could you do? You open the app and you go online, right? When I was a kid, so I bought my first stock after my bar mitzvah. I still remember what it was. It won't mean anything to anyone in the room, but for the Americans in the room, it was a company called Topps. They made baseball cards because I like baseball cards. Like that, right? The second stock I bought was a company called Tofuti, which you can still find in the stores here because as a kosher consumer, I like the fact that they had parva cream, right? So I kind of invested my interests in the early days. And the only way to buy a stock when I was 14, which is now 36 years ago, was to call a stockbroker. And you called him up. His last name was Rosenberg. Don't ask me why I remember that. And I called him up, and I'd like to buy 300 or whatever it was, shares of Topps, and he would do it. And then you'd actually wait in the mail for it to come. And today you self-serve everything. The thing we self-serve least, self-service, by the way, is an unbelievable efficiency, okay? And it's a sense of agency, which is critically important in doing anything. The thing we absolutely almost can't self-service in this country in particular is anything you need almost from the government, right? Even, how many people have kids? Okay, try to sign them up for GON here. Not even that is self-service, in particular not in Jerusalem. So almost nothing is, so all the efficiencies that have ripped through the economy, everything from ordering taxis to checking your stocks to doing anything like this, massive efficiencies driven by technology has passed over everything having to do with government. Funny story, I know it's in the news right now, WeWork and the book, and anyway, they wanted to turn Iryat Yerushalayim into like a WeWork-style place. And Adam Newman walks through the city of Jerusalem with Nir Barkat, who was then the mayor, and he's scratching his head, and he's saying, it can't work, but I can't figure out why it can't work here. And it can't work, and it can't work, and it can't work, and he couldn't figure it out. Finally, he figured it out. He said, I got it. He said, none of the WeWorks around the world have drawers and bookcases because there are no papers. They only have bookcases for books. There's so many papers here. It can't be a WeWork, and that's part of the bureaucracy. So why do I tell you this story? Bob wants me to talk about freedom. But before we get to freedom, we need to talk about things that are more basic. And that is, if we have a world that is accelerating at a rapid pace over here, and another world that is like a tortoise over here and a pain in the neck, where it takes 10 years to get a building permit, and you see how much energy Fluor has, and it takes 10 years to get a building permit, we have a problem. And for those of you who've seen the famous graph in The Economist, which has now made the rounds on Twitter 10 times, when you look at prices in the private sector versus things that are governed by the public sector, it's going like this, right? Education's another one of it. The cost of education, actually, in most parts of the Western world, and even Israel, by the way, continues to go up. Why? Because it's heavily regulated at the end of the day, and you have tons of inefficiencies in it, and technology, despite the fact that you can learn anything on YouTube, right? despite the fact that you can access Coursera or edX or MIT or whatever it is, still the cost of education comes up. Now, we all know, by the way, I forget what the guy's name was, who was Henry Kissinger's aide, but there's like a law, if something has to stop, it eventually will, we just don't know when. Eventually this will come apart because people won't tolerate it. But there's a difference for whether it comes apart and we dismantle it. Those are two separate paths, which I won't get into now. But the key to unlocking, it's 10 years now to the big protests on Rothschild for the cost of living in Israel. Actually, things haven't changed that much, right? Maybe some of the new reforms will help right now, maybe. But things haven't helped that much because technology has not gotten to these core industries which impact the core parts of our life, and they're being prevented from going in there. There's real reasons they're being prevented from going there, because technology actually enables freedom and agency that drives down prices, that changes supply chains, that undermines the way things have been done but can be done. Think about the phone, this little phone. Think about the cost that this thing has collapsed, even though it costs $1,000 for the phone, right? I don't get a telephone anymore that I put in my house. I don't need a computer in many cases. I don't need a phone book. A million things. I don't need an encyclopedia. A million things that have been collapsed into this cost reduction device, and it provides freedom. Technology, at the end of the day, provides freedom and power and agency. But that's tough for a lot of people. And it's tough for a lot of people who are stuck in their jobs for a lot of years and stuck with a way of doing things. And therefore, these systems, for the most part, end up getting challenged from the outside. They rarely reform from within. And that's the first point I wanted to cover. But I want to try to draw a world that even when it has technology, it doesn't have freedom. And we've had stirring examples of this in the last few months. Anyone know what I'm referring to? Very good. Who said that? What am I referring to? With what? Not really the COVID thing. So we've had a couple of events that happened in China and to Chinese companies recently which should wake us all up. But who uses TikTok in the room? Nobody. Fantastic. Thanks. Jack Ma, founder of Alibaba, tries to take Ant, the big financial service provider in Asia, public. They block the IPO, right? And then Ma disappears for a bunch of weeks. Alibaba gets a massive fine. Recently, this last few days, there's another amazing thing. There's a bunch of companies, large companies at this point, one particular, which provides online tutoring for fees in China. People want to educate their kids. The government decided last week that that would have to be a public service. And so there can be technology, but if the fundamental society that you are a part of doesn't offer freedom, it actually doesn't matter. In the first talk I gave to this group, when Jose Pinero was in the room, I still remember he came over to me and says, Moses, it's all about Moses. I described that the big gift of the Jewish people to the world is actually freedom. We don't think about this, but let me help you. So the Jewish people and many others, Pasuk says, V'gam erev rav halaytam, a group of nations went up with them. Jews were not the only people who were Israelites. Bnei Israel were not the only people enslaved in Egypt. And they worked 7 days a week. And by the way, whatever they made wasn't for them. They didn't get to keep it. If it reminds you of China, you'd be correct. And they didn't get to keep it. And comes Moses, who is an outsider. He grows up in the king's house. He leaves for somewhere between 68 and 40 years, depending on who you believe, and then ultimately comes back and says, hey, let the people go. This is, we don't understand in the modern mind, this is a radical idea. The same radical idea, by the way, is around Shabbat, which is there is no natural difference between days. They all look the same. They carry on forever. Years, there's a solar calendar that the Egyptians discovered. The lunar calendar is a Jewish calendar. Those are natural occurrences. Days and weeks, there's no difference. They all look the same. They carry on. When the Jewish people introduced Shabbat, what they basically introduced is freedom. It means I'm not a slave. I don't have to work 7 days. You own your own time. That freedom enables you to own your own property because you can stop and say, I'm not working today. That actually enables you to own your own property. For a different time, that's why Judaism is actually the first harbinger of capitalism in the world. That's for a whole different lecture. The right to own your own private property. So this notion of political freedom, of the ability to work for myself, by myself, and not be worried that somebody takes it away, is to be cherished. And you must be aware of that at all points. Why do you need to be aware of that at all points? Because political freedom and economic freedom are absolutely intertwined. They're absolutely intertwined. If you can't keep your private property, it turns out you're not free politically. If you can't keep your private property, it turns out you're not free politically. And the inverse is also true, which is if you're not free politically, odds are that you won't keep your private. You may get away with it for a while, but ultimately somebody takes it away. And so the second notion here is that we have tools, technology. We have tools, intelligence. We have tools, hard work. But if we don't have freedom, we actually can't express and use those tools to their fullest power. Not only to their fullest power, to our own communal and individual fulfillment. We can't use those tools. And so you have multiple levels of freedom that one needs to stand on guard to guide. The right to own your own property, fundamental. The right to use technology to get ahead and to help you own your own property. I'll open a set of parentheses. One of the most radical ideas at this conversation with the housing ministry is people should be allowed, and I deeply believe this, to issue their own permits. I'll come back to that in a second. Their own building permits. There's no other way to break the logjam, in my view. And you must use the tools that have been granted in the 21st century, technology, information, connectivity, to insist and make sure that political and economic freedom persists and grows. Because if things are static, they actually recede. Anything that's not moving forward is actually moving backward. And it's not obvious in today's political environment, and this is true in Western democracies as well, it is not obvious that this is obvious to all of the politicians and all the bureaucrats. When it started with Barack Obama saying, you didn't make that, so he didn't act on it. But maybe I did make that, right? And that doesn't mean the government doesn't have a role in creating things and making infrastructure. Of course it does. And we need it for that. But if the citizenry, read intelligent citizenry, you, others, does not stand on guard, it pulls back. It recedes. That's the nature of these things. And tools are getting more powerful, significantly more powerful. Technology tools are getting a lot more powerful. Very, very quickly. Very, very, very quickly. And so, powerful tools can be used for good, and they can also be used for bad. And I'll open up a controversial topic for 1 second in order to make the point, and then I'm going to delve into it some more. So everyone knows that one, Ben and Jerry's, right? What do you think about it? Anybody? Go ahead.
What do you think about it in what extent? Exactly.
Well, I left it as an open question on purpose.
It's a very large issue. So
why do you want to answer it?
Because it's a great issue.
Oh, great. So tell me, what do you think?
Okay, so the main thing is it's good tasting, which is a good starting point.
Okay, you like the ice cream.
Yeah, meaning I do care about it enough about whether we're going to consume it or not, and whether it's going to be provided in Israel or not. And that's the reason that I would wish that it will keep on going in
Okay.
being solved. But under those circumstances and terms that are trying to force us,
Yeah.
not so much.
Super personal answer. You like the ice cream and you don't want to eat it because they annoyed you.
No, I don't. I want it. I don't want it to be sold in Israel.
I got it.
I might eat it in Manhattan or anywhere.
All right. Anybody else?
It's the opposite, no? In Israel, we have an Israeli
Yeah.
business person. In America, at one point.
The main problem I have with it is that private company, corporation, practically dictates to the state of Israel what it should or shouldn't do, what it has to do to continue to be able to sell this ice cream in shops, and I think it's wrong.
Okay. What's your name?
Max.
Max is really bothered. I'm going to put words into your mouth. Tell me if I got it right. By the fact that a private corporation decided to dictate to the state of Israel what its policies should be. Do you think that's what happened?
Yeah.
Did they talk to the state of Israel? Not really. Not really. Right? So why do you think they decided to dictate to the state of Israel what its policies are?
Because they want to force a private, let's say, entrepreneur in Israel to sell or avoid selling products to certain populations in the state of Israel.
Do you believe in economic freedom?
Yeah.
So don't they have a right to do that? It's their business.
No, because it's not freedom. It's forcing the government to apply by a certain set of morals that the country doesn't want to.
The government doesn't have to do it. The government can stop the ice cream from coming in. They didn't force them to do anything. They said, you want to do business with us? These are the terms. Do you believe in freedom? You're not sure.
When you put it that way, then yeah, if we go to complete freedom, okay, yeah, they did. Everything's okay, but I don't think we have to go to the end.
Okay, so you don't believe in ultimate economic freedom?
Yeah.
Okay. So we should shut them down.
No, we should apply force in a different direction.
Okay, you're avoiding the topic, but good ahead.
I think it's more about social responsibility, which Milton Friedman spoke against in the early 1970s, saying that the corporation is trying to cater to the people, not to the government, because they're trying to please a certain sector. Managers are known for that, not only about Israeli politics, but also about environmental policies and stuff like that. While Milton Friedman says that this isn't supposed to be, a corporation is supposed to make money and bring back money of the investors.
I know what Milton Friedman says, but what do you think?
I agree with him.
Oh, you agree with him? Okay, so you think businesses should shut up and just sell ice cream?
Well, they decide to do a social responsibility or to practice it because in the end they try to get more customers and more money out of it.
Right. So it's marketing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so that's part of business, isn't it?
It is part, but if you put a lot of emphasis and some of your money on that, it will go away from other parts. And you can see also.
But they have economic freedom. They should be allowed to do that.
Well, they're using the investors' money. So are they allowed to use the investors' money?
They should ask their investors.
But also using that on other purposes brings up the cost of the product itself.
That's their problem, right?
It is.
Yeah, okay. Anybody else? Go ahead.
I think it's a question of red marks. What are the borders? Because I think that when politicians in Israel, after the announcement of Ben and Jerry, suggested that the government will take some actions against Ben and Jerry, they're actually going on the same line. Because if Ben and Jerry says you have nothing to be offended by, it's just good business, and so does the government of Israel say so. So it's basically doing business, and the question.
So they should be allowed to.
No, I'm not saying that.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying that we should. This is not the question. The question is, where are the red lines? What interference is allowed and what interference is not allowed?
Who should decide the red lines?
You should decide the red lines.
Who's you?
Who's you? I think it's the government.
The government. Okay, so you don't believe in economic freedom. You think the government should shut down Ben and Jerry's and they shouldn't be allowed to sell their ice cream here.
No, I believe.
Aren't you at an economic freedom summit? Didn't Bob say talk about economic freedom?
No, I think it's taking things to the edge. I think that the regulator has a job. Yes. You talked about regulator that gives us many problems also gives us the safety. I can sleep at night.
Okay, so you want more regulation. People who don't like that Avi, I think that's the name of the Mankel Ben and Jerry's Israel, should sell in Yehuda v'Shamron, shut them down. We should regulate that.
I think that we should decide together. I think that
Who's together? Who's we?
I think that the policy, the people who write the policy, and I think this is the job of the parliament. They should decide what are the red lines of political.
That's great. The parliament should spend all day on ice cream
Yeah, I think
instead of putting housing permits.
it's the tip of the iceberg.
Okay, no pun intended, but the ice cream berg. So I'll tell you my view, and I hope nobody takes a soundbite from this. I'm actually thrilled to know that Ben & Jerry's wants to revoke the license of poor Avi, who I think is the Mankal. That's his name? Avi, because he wants to sell in Yehuda v'Shamron. I want to tell you, thank God I know that Avi wants to sell his ice cream there and doesn't want to give in to these people. Because unlike what's your name? Unlike what Daniela said about social responsibility, I think that Milton Friedman, in this case, well, in many cases he's right, I think turns out to be wrong, and particularly in the 21st century. I know that's like anathema in these worlds, but in modern 21st century society, people identify with brands that they identify their values with. It's just a fact, and by the way, it's going to be more than that. Because as the world has become more transparent, and in some ways more fake, through fake news, the ethics and values of a product and brand are going to matter a lot. And they matter more and more. And instead of hiding agendas off in this thing called CSR, corporate social responsibility, which no one ever sees, the fact that Ben & Jerry's and the, anti-Semitic woman who sits at the chairman of the board there, put this right front and center, makes me happy. Not because I think Prime Minister Bennett or, what's her name, the Sarat HaKalkala, should stop them from coming, because as a consumer, I don't want to buy that product. And so with the tools that we have and the values that we have choices and power. And with the technology tools that we have choices and power. And the fact that you say the government should stop it means that you've abdicated. You know what the word abdicated means? Given up. Given up your power, your economic freedom, and your ability to do something about it. And so, in the modern society where we have these super powerful tools, we should actually ask businesses, what are their core values? What are they willing to support? Because it's out there anyway. It's part of their brand. It's part of what we discover through more transparency right now. And it has real economic value. And I realize that this is anathema to what Milton Friedman says, but it's been 50 plus years. Maybe not fully, like I said, I don't have a PhD in economics. I didn't read them enough. But it's fundamental. And we've missed the point. We've missed the point about why it's important that we're really clear what our values are as consumers, as customers, as economic agents. That's our freedom to exercise. And we've missed the point through this nonsense on Twitter of how you can take real action to infuse our values. And the point I want to make about this is we can talk a big game about economic freedom. But if we don't use the technology tools to unshackle the economy from regulation, if we don't use the technology tools to exercise our own agency for freedom, the words are hollow. They won't matter. We'll be overwhelmed. And you are, to use a baseball term or a basketball term, a free agent in this economy with ever more power than you had before. Ever more power than you had before, because you can be heard by everybody. Because you can organize lots of people. And because of that, and with this I want to finish, it's really important that we define for ourselves, and that you define for yourselves, What are the values of our economy? And I've said this over and over again in 9 different places. I'm going to say it again. The marker thinks we ought to be like Scandinavia. These people think we ought to be like the OECD. That's the worst measurement ever. There's like 20 failed countries in the OECD measurement. And this one at Kohelet thinks we ought to be like the American economy. And the question I want to ask is, what is the Israeli economy? We're 73 years old, for God's sake. We ought to figure this out. And we can have a unique economy rooted on uniquely Israeli values. We have 3,000 years of written history and written economic rules that should be uniquely ours, that start with the freedom that Moses insisted that we all have. Political and economic freedom. That also cares for the other. It's called the Ach in the Torah, the Ger. We don't have to talk about social welfare to care with the other. That is a citizen responsibility. We don't wait for the government. They're not good at the job. They're really not. You've been waiting for them 10 years for a housing permit. They're not good at it. And in modern society with modern tools, the question we should be asking ourselves is about the ach. How do we increase the pie? Because there's more economic mobility available in society if people get educated, and if we educate them, because again, waiting for the government will be dead. Professor Moab has pointed that out many times. They can't move the education system fast enough. So you need to, and you need to, and you need to, and you need to, and we have technology tools to do that, and God bless. Hopefully they won't take away the tutoring businesses like they did in China, because we'll stand for our freedom. And so we have an opportunity to really double down on what are uniquely Israeli, Jewish values of a responsible economy. It's like Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. With great freedom comes great responsibility. So you are responsible because you're free, if you don't believe in them, to stop the Ben & Jerry's thing. Don't wait for Bennett. Do it yourself. If we think the education system is screwy and doesn't educate enough people in the social periphery, then do something about it. Don't wait. And if you're concerned that we don't have enough economic freedom and that it takes the municipality of Jerusalem and every other municipality in this country way too long to issue a building permit, let's get some technology tools and a movement going, and let's do something about it. Why do I say self-issuance of business permits, and with this I finish, is super important? Fleur said Remy is corrupt and incompetent and bankrupt and whatever, and it may be true. But we have a notion, like somebody here said, that there's a limited amount of land, and so we need to parcel it out really carefully, and we got to check everyone 100 times because we're trying to catch the few crooks that exist. Most people are pretty good. And we discover that when we trust people, they actually do the right thing. And we have, for a country, a pretty high solidarity level, at least compared to where I come from in America. Solidarity here is, and since everyone knows everybody, and there's only 2 degrees of separation in Israel instead of 6 degrees of separation, the price for doing something nefarious is actually pretty large on a social level. If we trust people and give them technology tools to self-issue and the building collapses, we can do something about that. And we can increase the punishment and the societal punishment to go do that. But that's called exercising these powerful tools, and they're powerful tools of freedom, the powerful ability to organize and do something about it. So do something about it to ensure that we have economic success, because we must expand this bracha to more sectors of this society. We must insist that other sectors of society come in and be a part of the bracha that is happening here. Look what's happened in the high-tech sector that I started with in the last 12 months. It's stunning. You know why? Because it's free, and it's technological, and it's people exercising agency and the right to do things. B'atzlacha. You want to take a question or two? I can take a question or two.
So I agree with you, one Jewish value is Shabbat and time. But in the same Ten Commandments, it also says, thou shalt not steal.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And what I understand that to be is something called private property. Okay, so I would say that is a Jewish value. And the core of what we're talking about in economic freedom is indeed recognizing private property.
Right.
And I think it's a huge crisis in corporate America today, that core Jewish concept called private property and ownership is now being widely disregarded.
What are you doing about it?
So I'm inviting you to come and speak on
Oh, okay.
No, but I mean, I think that's a crisis. So I agree. I think it's better.
That's why I live in here. It's not corporate America here. We're more free. We really are. We're more free here than in America, trust me.
I think there's a contradiction in what you're saying about Ben and Jerry's, in the sense that I don't think that the consumers of Ben and Jerry's, most of them don't even care about Israel, don't even know where we are on the map. Okay? And it's the technological tool of social media that is kind of hypnotizing an entire generation to believe we're evil.
Fleur, let me help you out. You ready?
How do you reconcile?
Fleur, let me help you out. Unilever, which owns Ben & Jerry's, their stock is down since the announcement
Yes.
significantly.
For how long, though?
I don't know, but what I do know is that I think most people in the world are pretty good. I do. Not everyone, bad actors.
I agree.
So somebody's decided that, I mean, there's a big company, Unilever, right? But like my dad told me this morning, he's not buying Telma anymore. He's not buying Kariot. You know why? Because it's owned by Unilever.
Kariot?
So he told me. That's what my dad told me this morning. And my mom told him, but the grandkids like it. What are you doing? And so, and he, you know, if you think that the forces of evil can organize on social media, well, so can you. And we can drive Unilever's stock down so that they feel the pain and they understand why they're wayward people and they made the wrong decision. And we should do that. And we should. That's part of economic freedom. I exercise my agency to decide I'm not buying Unilever products. I'm not buying Ben & Jerry's. You can make that decision. And so, you know, I don't think we can stand here and say, you know what? Ben & Jerry's can't take away his license. Well, they can. They have the right to do that. It's a contractual right. They took it away. I don't agree with it, but they have the contractual right. And if we start there, we'll be in a really bad place going forward. And Bob believes in economic freedom, and he made me promise to talk about it.
So do you agree in the anti-BDS laws of the state that makes different big companies divest from Unilever, because that's intervention of the government?
Yeah, that's a really good question, by the way. I've thought a lot about this topic, about the anti-BDS laws and why they're different in this case. So there's one set of laws, and by the way, let me just say this very openly. I think Ben & Jerry's decision is despicable, okay? Particularly because they'll sell in every other economy. They'll sell in Syria and in China where the Uyghurs are being oppressed, and they don't give a damn. It's pure anti-Semitism. Let me just be clear about that, okay? In my view. And so, that having been said, I think the anti-BDS laws, which are state-mandated laws as opposed to federal, and I think there's an important distinction there in the United States, where the states have gotten together and decided these are our values. And so, my view is we need to do the same as a society and a country. These are our values. And I admire and I want to do more business with states that have anti-BDS laws than states that don't. By the way, I watched Francis Suarez, mayor of Miami, a man I admire, though I've never met. I have communicated with, I've never met. Transform Miami in a heartbeat, by the way. And he stood with Israel all through. And I'm telling my companies, go look at your U.S. headquarters in Miami. Good values. He stood up for Cuba when all these other guys hid in the, Ben & Jerry's, hid in the toilet. That's what happens.
Okay.
Yeah, I can take 2 more questions and I got to go because my wife's going to get angry. And if I want to have economic freedom, I need to go. Sorry, you spoke right. Go ahead.
I would love if you can describe a little bit more this unique Israeli economy as opposed to the American economy.
Yeah. I call this in my most recent book, Kalkalat Achva. And which doesn't have a good English translation. Balaji Srinivasan calls it something like win and help others win. And someone else wanted to call it the economy of fraternity. But basically, I think it's like this. And this is, you need smarter economists than I am to figure this out. It basically says the following. You ought to be as successful, and it's a little bit from this week's Parshat Shavua, by the way. Okay? You have talents. You're a talented guy. What's your name? Moor. You're a talented guy, Moor. And you have talents, and you've also been blessed. You probably went to a decent university, I think maybe, and you got a decent job, and you've done reasonably well. And so you can decide to keep that all for yourself. It's your decision, by the way. You have private property, and the government shouldn't take it away from you and tax you excessively or anything like that. But you should be encouraged by a civic society that has a set of values that says we need to support, and I'll come back to what the word support means, we need to support the other members of this society who either don't have the tools, don't have the education, don't have the opportunities to do that. How? Not by the government taxing you, necessarily, because they're actually terrible allocators of capital as well, but by you exercising your sense of agency, klapei achicha or achotcha, your brother or your sister, and investing in them. You have saved property, income. I promise you your kids are not going to need more than one apartment and 10 pairs of underwear. And you can invest some of your excess capital in ensuring that the pie grows for other people. You can invest some of your additional capital that you have and loan it out to other people. This is what I think both the Torah wants and what I think a Jewish economy has actually been throughout the ages. If you look at the Takanot and the Kehilot in Sfarad during the 1200s and the 1300s, this is what they were about. It's how you loan money and still recover it within the Kehillah, and what is your responsibility to your Kehillah versus another Kehillah. If you look at the Takanah of Pruzbul of Hillel, right, it's going to be Shnat Shemitah pretty soon. And so he saw that people weren't lending money out to other people, so the credit markets dried up. So what did he do? He said, there goes Shmitat Ksafim. You can go collect your debts from other people. We need to keep the credit markets, but you must lend. And you must lend in order to make sure that the people do this. So I think that's kind of one set of core values. The other set of core values, and that I think expands out. If we kind of each, like I said before, educate and strap 4 or 5 people on our shoulders and bring them into the modern economy, the pie grows. You'll actually get richer. Okay? It's good for you too when the pie grows. There was a great line by Professor Neil Ferguson who said, he was giving a lecture on the wonders of technology, and somebody yelled out from the audience, but you can't eat an iPad, right? Which is if people can't make their own living, they don't buy iPads either at the end of the day. So expanding the blessing, I think, is very, very significant. I think there's a second part to this, and that is, I'm not a behavioral economist. I'm not even an economist. But we all know at this point, by reading enough of Kahneman and others' books, that the way, call it elites in the economy behave has dramatic impact downstream. If I broadcast Gewalt, things are disaster, people contract, and they constrict spending, and they contract consumption, and they contract their economic behavior. If we have a belief that things are good, then people don't. And I tend to believe that people who have been successful in the economy have a responsibility through economic cycles to invest and be more expansive. You'll note I said people and not the government because I'm really worried about what's going on the government side with expansive monetary policy. I actually think they're taking away private property through that, but that's maybe for another conversation. And to be expansive and to broadcast behaviorally that things are going to be okay, because the people who get hurt in economic downturns tend to be the lower parts of society rather than the higher parts of society. And so that kind of mindset, which I think drives Jewish values, and I can go on forever, I wrote a 360-page book on the topic, I think are kind of core tenets. By the way, side point, I always ask, there was Aliyah Regel 3 times a year. Why was there Aliyah Regel? You ever think about it? Why did everyone go to the Beit HaMikdash? To feed the Kohanim is one reason, but they got a tiny amount. What they really fed were everybody else. It says, Pasuk says, "Smachtem b'fnei Hashem ata ubincha uvitecha v'avdecha v'amatecha v'ager v'alevi v'ayatom v'ager v'alevi v'amana asher b'sharecha." It's the biggest social network ever. Everybody came to Fleur Hassan's Jerusalem from all parts of the country, and they had a big social network meeting to share food and do business. It worked, the system. So it was the biggest social network ever. All right, bye-bye.